right, welcome everyone to this week's Crypto Mondays. Today is already halfway through the month. That's crazy, actually. It's the 15th. Oh my God. I don't know where you guys are on the side of the world, but it could be the 15th, it could be the 16th. We're halfway through the year and Corona is still among us. But that's okay because we have a guy here who is a super interesting figure, not only in the crypto space, but for anyone who's just interested in any type of blockchain technology, security. I've been reading a lot through your website and seen a couple things that you've done. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jameson Lopp. He's here
Hello.
us today.
Yes, and it's actually really cool. Obviously, coronavirus sucks, but it's kind of cool that it kicked off this virtual reality stuff because I had been doing VR for a couple of years, and I didn't have any VR friends, and now I have a whole VR community too.
Lucky for you, man. I would be on my headset, but I'm running both my computer to like do event stuff, and then I also have a live stream running, so I'm just like, oh, this is easier. If my live stream dies, I can catch it. So sorry I'm not in VR with you, but I mean, like he said, it is an immersive experience. I've been on the VR wave for about 2 years now, and I love it, and I'm really happy that everyone's getting on that wave because look how easy it is for you and me to just say, hey, let's meet up. So I'm super excited for where this takes us. So I have a couple questions for you. My very first question, this is the most important question of your day, is can you please tell me the history behind your beard? This has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, but I am curious. I'm a beard person. I like hair, so I'm just like, oh, I gotta ask him.
Yeah, so I mean, I have had a short beard for most of my adult life, probably 15 years or so. I got tired of shaving and I would just have a short beard and, keep it trimmed. That was easy. I suppose it wasn't until probably I got into Bitcoin and started seeing Greg Maxwell and his wizard beard that I started getting jealous, and I wanted to see how far I could really take it. So that the iconic like 1.5 foot length that you see in most of my photos, that's probably a good 2-year beard length that it actually took a lot more effort than I anticipated. Like most of the things that I do, it was sort of an experiment. But in order to really do it right, I mean, it's a regimen. I have a lot more respect for women with long hair now, who have to, put in a lot of time and effort to keep that, straight and conditioned and everything, because I was having to moisturize and shampoo and condition and oil and wax, and it was like 20 to 30 minute per day type of regimen to keep it in pristine condition. It's in coronavirus times, I'm not putting as much effort into keeping myself looking that nice, but yeah, it was just a fun new hobby to take up for a while, but it certainly comes with a fair amount of additional work.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, cool. I'm glad that you have a journey that you've been through with like hair. Like hair is one of those things in life where I notice you go on a journey with like, your hair, your body. So I don't know. I like to see people's journeys. So anyways, back to crypto. So real quick, let me, it's possibly Lou. Sorry about that. But real quick, tell me, you're seem to be an OG in the space, and I know that just based off people, I've heard your name circulating. It took me a while to like get around and like study like everyone because I come interacting with so many people. I guess tell me where you started, and I guess did you see yourself where you are today before? Was it something that you knew you were gonna be successful within the space with your multiple projects that you have and just your overall personality, or is it something that you felt like it was like a triumph? I don't know, just give me your love, your struggles, and your experiences.
Yes, it was a long series of weird fortunate events, I suppose. When I first actually started paying attention to Bitcoin around 2012, after ignoring it for I don't know how long. I'll never remember when I first heard about Bitcoin, because I know I ignored it. And I figured it was gonna, blow up and everybody was gonna lose their money. But when I finally started paying attention to it, it captured my interest both on the libertarian ideology side and on the computer science, technical side. And I just thought it was an interesting project. I think the idea of money as an open source project was interesting. And so I paid attention to it. I read news for a while. It wasn't until a few years later that I decided to go deeper. And that's when I created Satoshi. I forked Bitcoin Core. I wanted to add more instrumentation and metrics because I was kind of a back-end DevOps web engineer at the time. I wanted to bring more transparency and understanding to what the node was actually doing. And, as I just sort of spent more and more time on this as a hobby, I eventually realized that I was spending so much time on it that I was really spending more time than my day job. So I guess it was a couple years after that, early 2016, when I realized it was finally at the point when I could actually make this my day job. That's when I started looking at Bitcoin companies, sending my resume out, and was fortunate to get a gig at BitGo and run infrastructure there for a few years and just continue to slide down the rabbit hole, do more projects, try to build my own understanding. And then, I don't know, at some point in time along there, I guess also it was around when I went full-time Bitcoin was when I started doing local community meetups as well. Initially just attending, and then after a year or two, starting my own more technical meetup, bringing in speakers, once again, just trying to build a community locally. And somehow that's transitioned into social media and, building a community, joining other groups of people online. And, how did it turn into a big thing? I don't know. I mean, probably because I tend to speak my mind, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way, but I think that also I think that my sometimes brash or assholishness attitude, especially around a lot of the scaling debate stuff, captured a lot of people's attention, polarized people. Controversy creates attention. It builds interest. That's how the news media works, right? Is you got to do controversial stuff to keep people entertained. And I guess just sort of throwing myself in the midst of that, I was already in the midst of it due to working in the space full time, but then publicly throwing myself into the midst of debates and controversy also kind of helped catapult me on the sort of public figure side. And, that came with its own set of trade-offs. I've had to endure a lot more hate and anger and deal with not only cyber attacks because of my job and because of my position, that people are always attackers are trying to prod me, find weaknesses in my own setup or my company's. And it wasn't until like that point in late 2017 when it spilled over into meat space that I guess you could say shit got real. When I had to deal with the law enforcement situation. But once again, I just kind of I saw that as a new challenge, a new opportunity. And sometimes I actually wonder if that anonymous person who sent the SWAT team to my house has kept tabs on me, and it would be really interesting to know if they realize that they actually kind of pushed me to take this whole other step and journey into the operational security and privacy side of things that has gained, I guess, even more attention for me in that particular sphere. So it has been a arduous and expensive process, both in terms of time and other resources. But this is kind of my nature, I guess, is, I find something interesting and I get obsessed with it. And I've been obsessed with Bitcoin for many years. Now I'm obsessed with like the privacy, operational security stuff. And who knows what might capture my attention next.
I want you to
Virtual
know
reality.
that what we were saying, virtual all the way. But I was gonna say, while you were saying, "Oh, I'm obsessed with it," you started scratching your arm a little bit, and I could tell because your hand. And I was like, "Oh, he's like, he's getting the jitters or whatever it is." Oh man. Okay, so I have so many questions, so little time. So the last thing you said was regarding security, and you became obsessed with security, and that person, pushed you into unleashing your ultimate potential. Tell me a little bit about Casa more, because I've heard you never need to worry about your Bitcoin with it, and it is heavily based on security. So how did that fall into the timeline?
Yeah, so like I said, I was building infrastructure at BitGo for about 3 years. BitGo is a multi-sig enterprise security service. So their specialty was helping power exchanges, payment processors, essentially Bitcoin businesses that needed to have automated hot wallets. And of course, automated hot wallets are one of the scariest, nightmarish scenarios that you can find yourself in the Bitcoin space, because they're very juicy targets for hackers to try to find a vulnerability in and just siphon all of your money away in a matter of milliseconds. So it was a very challenging problem. I think we made a lot of progress. We learned some hard lessons. People made mistakes. Humans being humans. There certainly were some disasters, some things that we had to learn from and move forward and continue to evolve that service. But throughout that whole time period, this was really an enterprise focus. So I found myself still in the situation where I felt like my own personal cold storage setup was a huge pain for me to maintain. I was spending basically a weekend out of every year updating my cold storage, trying to set up a system where I felt like there was at least a decent chance that if I got hit by a truck, that my heirs and executors would actually be able to recover my funds. But it took a lot of time and effort and planning, and even working with attorneys and friends and family and stuff. So I felt like if it was this much of a hassle for me, that the vast majority of Bitcoiners were not going to go to all of that trouble, or may not even be able to go to the trouble to create a robust self-custody setup. So it was just kind of happenstance fate that a couple of years ago, this random guy that I'd never met before reached out to me through some connections at Duke University, and we met up at Duke University, had some cocktails at one of the bars on campus there, and this guy, Jeremy Welch, pitched this idea of how we could make a self-custody setup easier using multi-sig, using hardware devices. And it really struck a chord with me, because I felt like this was something I personally would want, and that if I felt like it would save me a lot of time, that there was probably a decent gap in the market for a high security but high usability solution. And that was just kind of the basic idea that we started with, and we've iterated on that for several years, and still got a long ways to go, but I think we've made a lot of great progress.
So yeah, same. I heard someone's emojis going off. Give this guy some emojis, because he deserves it. Honestly, like you're blowing me away right now. So going on with your project, I know you still have a long way to go. You've come such a long way. What has been, I guess, your biggest achievements with it? Has there been any major setbacks? Are you facing anything like major? Like we've been through the bear market, we've been through the bull market. We're going back, to another halving season where people are saying, "Hey, Bitcoin's going to shoot up. Hey, it may not be a 2017 run. Hey, it may be more." There's a lot of speculation going around. So I guess, how does that impact you and your projects?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different types of setups. There's a diverse range of different types of people that are in the space, and that's what we have to deal with is figuring out like what is our target market. I think that one of the weird things about Casa, we're in a kind of unique situation where a lot of self-custody setups are completely free, open source, do everything yourself type of setups. And those are great. That is the only way that you can like truly have maximum sovereignty and privacy in the space is to do literally everything yourself. And that will always be an option. Nobody can take that away from anyone. What we're trying to do is find a sweet spot in sort of the spectrum of do everything yourself and have everything done by a trusted third party. Where is a decent place in the spectrum between those two where we can still maintain a lot of the principles of letting people manage their own keys, but also give them software that guides them through the best practices, that eliminates a lot of the foot guns, and be able to provide a level of service and support that you can't really get with free open source software, because that is always going to be more of a community volunteer type of support system. So something where we can help people be their own bank. One phrase that one of our employees likes to use is that at Casa we don't hold your keys, we hold your hand. But we're still trying that one out.
Aww. That's cute. You guys are gonna have your own case slogan soon, but I'm hearting that one. All right, so I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to open it up to the crowd because I'm sure all these lovely people who love to hear your backstory here have many, many questions. So you got lots of projects. Here you are with your Satoshi persona, looking fabulous in orange and black and yellow, whatever you want to call it. You also have, your attack projects, and so I think I counted like 6 or 7 projects that you had going on. Out of all those projects, which one was your favorite? And which one, I guess, impacted you the most, pushed you forward, really, really set you on your goal, really hit that milestone for you?
Yeah, I mean, the Satoshi project was always, I think, the biggest leap for me. Because I'm not a C++ developer, so it was just a pain to figure out, how to maintain and build C++ projects in the first place, and that is a project where, at least twice a year, I have to put in half a day to a day, basically rebasing all of the changes from upstream Bitcoin Core. So that keeps me on my toes because Bitcoin Core is such an incredibly active project, and there's always a million conflicting changes, with every new release that comes down that I have to sift my way through. That was just kind of I think the basis for me, which has provided me with a lot of satisfaction, because even though I don't really spend much time developing it or adding new stuff or new metrics to it, my original goal with Satoshi was to help enlighten developers and users to understand what was happening inside of the Bitcoin node. And over the years, a number of different core developers and people who were working really at the lowest layers of Bitcoin would reference Satoshi metrics to make arguments or make decisions about certain ways that we should go with the Bitcoin project. So I will certainly continue maintaining that and running it for as long as I'm capable. And these other projects, a lot of them are just one-off tools where, as I've been building Bitcoin wallets, they're just things that I've run into multiple times to the point that I felt like I was sufficiently motivated to write some software around it so that I could save myself and hopefully other people in the future a lot of time. So these things like, just like ability to convert between different types of extended public keys, or my most recent one, the transaction size and weight calculator. These are just like some really low-level tools that are a real pain to try to do by hand, but if we can build some software around them, it just saves other people in the technical space a lot of time. So I'm sure that type of stuff is going to continue happening over the years. Bitcoin is it is the rabbit hole. I mean, you can go as deep as you want to, and sometimes you find, once you really get under the hood, you can find some kind of nasty stuff. So helping build software that prevents people from having to get too deep into the nitty-gritty of the protocol for certain things, I think helps us move the whole ecosystem forward. I mean, that's essentially what I'm trying to do with Casa is, use all the best practices, use the hardware, use all of the technical stuff that we've learned over the years of how to do Bitcoin right, but slap a nice shiny interface on top of it so that people can make use of all of those things without even necessarily knowing that they're there. Just shoving all the complexity under the hood of a nice, slick user interface.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I actually thought of one more question that was a little came to the back of my mind when you mentioned building on top of the Bitcoin core. So some people, as we know, Bitcoin can be considered to be slow. And we have the Lightning Network now, which some people use instead of doing regular Bitcoin transactions. Now, some people don't agree with using Lightning. They prefer to build on top of Bitcoin and add either not a second layer, but make the block size larger so that more transactions can process at a time. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Is it something that you see feasible? Technically, it could be done, but is it something that we should do? I guess it goes against the original white paper, but is it something we should do as we increase as a community? Is it like do we really need that step in security still? Like, do you really think that, I guess, we still face a possibility of attack? Could Bitcoin really be taken over? We're growing larger and larger, and people are seeing the necessity of that less and less. You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's an incredibly complicated question to answer comprehensively. I think that one point...
I apologize.
One point that most people will agree upon is that if you want to own Bitcoin, if you want to be sovereign unto yourself, you need to control your UTXOs. So at the very least, if we want Bitcoin to go fully mainstream, then we will want to eventually get to the point where every human can have their own UTXO. This is a UTXO set problem, which you may or may not be able to divorce from the blockchain problem. There are people who are working on scalability of UTXO sets, which is a related type of issue. But I think that in general, transacting on the blockchain is not something that can be scaled in the sense of scaling out. Like, you can scale it up, by which we mean you can run more expensive, more computational with throughput capable hardware and end up pricing people out of being able to run that hardware. That's one way you can do it, but you're going to hit some ceilings on that eventually. I've written a number of blog posts about what those various ceilings are, and it is the naive way of scaling. Instead, if we want to build Bitcoin to be a long-term, multi-generational system that outlasts fiat, with the average fiat currency only, I think, lasting 2 to 3 decades, if we want this to be something that our children and grandchildren are able to use, then we don't want to scale up. We want to scale out. We want to scale horizontally. And if you want to be able to do that, then you have to take the more technically sophisticated and complicated and therefore, more work over a longer period of time type of path, which is to create other technologies that make the use of the blockchain more efficient. And that is what these layered technologies do. It is what things like signature aggregation will allow us to do, is to basically do more with less. It is a harder, more challenging way to go forward and to evolve the system. But I believe that over the long term, it will ultimately have a greater payoff because we won't be making the same trade-offs and sacrifices that people who just want to naively scale vertically on chain are willing to make.
That's efficiency for you, folks. That's efficiency. Oh man, I love that explanation. Love that answer. I do agree with you where you say we need to scale, horizontally, not vertically. We're just getting into an era where if we do want to keep this currency around, what are we at, the 11th 10-year mark, 11th, something like that, right? Like,
yep.
If we don't want to phase out in the next 20 years, it is right. It is important to scale out to get more people, on board and not scale up, because we're just about seeing the U.S. dollar die. There's a lot of talks between the Federal Reserve relieving laws back in March for people to imprint a limited amount of money, to China now pressuring Trump to dissolve the U.S. dollar, and we see all this crazy stuff going on around us, and it makes sense as to why. And this is why this currency is important to not only us, but the generations to come. So with that, I want to open up the floor to anyone who has questions. I will allow you to raise your hand. You will see a button in just a second. I will unmute you. And if you want to come on stage, you can come on stage. If not, you can stay where you are, but just please amplify yourself. You guys can go ahead and raise your hands if you have any questions at this time. Thank you. My announcer voice, sorry. Everyone looks dead. They're like, man. Any questions, guys? No questions? Let me check real quick to see if there's anything on the stream. Oh, I think I got one hand. Okay, Juan, you have stage access and you also have the mic. Go for it.
Great. Hey, Love, how you doing, man?
Hey.
It's good to have you. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask you about standardization of OPSEC, or, I have a consulting company and I teach people how to protect themselves in general in the Bitcoin space, but we're also very focused on things like helping them mitigate the SIM card swap attacks and helping them do better password management and better account management. And there's a lot of things to deal with. And there's a lot of kind of traps that people can fall in, and I haven't really found a kind of cohesive sort of, standardization of security online. Like there's a lot of articles sort of everywhere, and you're doing excellent work with the articles that you're posting on the Casa Medium. I'm kind of catching up with those, but I'm just curious where you see the industry in this regard, because frankly, for new users that are not technically savvy that are entering this industry, there's a lot of ways to fail and not many to sort of be able to keep your Bitcoin safe, So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, right? Is that the trade-off of being able to take on great sovereignty and great power is that you also have to take on a lot of additional responsibility. And unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to this. If I did, I think that, we wouldn't be asking ourselves these questions in the first place, because I actually see it as being a long-term problem where this is something where over many generations, hundreds of thousands of years, our society has evolved and moved into a direction that is more fragile. It's obvious like why this happened, that capitalism has essentially optimized the structure of our society for maximum efficiency and output, and it does that through specialization. So the more specialized you can be in one specific field, the greater your output, the greater your economic value, the higher quality of life you're going to be able to live, because you're going to have greater income potential. The downside is that because you're spending all of your time focusing on one thing, you have obviously a limited amount of time that you are not spending on all of these other things. So because we're not worried about farming or hunting, taking care of our own food anymore, we have offloaded that to specialists. We can afford more food, but now we're in a much riskier position where, if our supply chains, if the food providers that we rely upon stop being as reliable, then we're in a very dire situation. So I think that is the same type of thing that is happening within operational security, cybersecurity, et cetera, is that people are going out onto the internet and they aren't used to having to protect themselves, think for themselves around all of these different issues. They're used to being able to find a specialist that solves the problems for them after the fact. But when we're talking about especially bearer assets where one mistake and it's gone forever and no one can get it back to you, I think that we're in for a rough transitional period. So basically, you can think of it as this is actually potentially an example of Bitcoin fixes this, where Bitcoin now incentivizes people to take on more responsibility for themselves, to learn about security, personal security, cybersecurity, et cetera. But during the period between beginning of Bitcoin and like a hyper Bitcoinization scenario where everyone is self-sovereign in dealing with these issues, there's a very rocky period of people learning a lot of hard lessons, and I think that's where we are right now. So we can try to distill a lot of these resources, and that's what I do. That's what a lot of other people in the space do, is we try to turn the complex best practices into short sound bites and tweets and easily digestible articles. But at the end of the day, people still have to be paying attention in the first place. So it's really a question of how do we capture enough of people's attention and time to get them to educate themselves. And this is a great service that you're providing, that a lot of other people are providing, of trying to lower the barrier for that and make it more achievable by people. But I don't think there's going to be any silver bullet. There's going to continue to be a lot of sad stories, just like we saw last week, public proclamation of catastrophic loss due to one small mistake. Hopefully over a long enough period of time, people will collectively learn these lessons. But I think that a lot of people are still going to have to learn them. I think that a bigger question that I still wonder about is whether or not this is going to keep happening at like an institutional and enterprise level as Bitcoin starts to go more mainstream and becomes worth a lot more than it is right now. What changes in the custodial environments? What happens when you have a single company that is now storing tens of billions or trillions of dollars worth of assets, and how does that change the risk-reward scenario for certain attackers? So I guess you could say I'm surprised that we have not seen more physical attacks in the Bitcoin space than we have so far. I think I have maybe 60 or 70 physical attacks that we know about that have been cataloged, and I'm personally surprised that the number is that low. And if we have a hype cycle, I certainly expect it's going to go up significantly. So prepare yourself, try to prepare other people, but that's the hard thing about all of this is when you're trying to sell people on operational security, you can very easily come off as being paranoid. It's also, for I think most people, a very boring topic to talk about, because you're essentially trying to pitch an insurance product to them. You're saying, you need to do all of these things to ensure that these bad things don't happen. And I think for a lot of people, it's very difficult calculus for them to try to do in their head of, what is the actual risk and reward of me bothering to do these things in the first place.
I could agree with that. People are like that for insurance. I could feel that. Juan, did that answer your question?
Not a great answer, but that's kind of my perspective. Yeah.
Well,
the answer is that there is no single answer, but it's kind of, I guess, my optimistic perspective that the anti-fragile nature of the system and the community will eventually get us into a world where people are more self-reliant, but until we get to that point, there's still going to be a lot of catastrophes.
That seems fair. It's honest, and it's just, it's the world. It's unpredictable, but hey, here we are. All right, we have one more question. I'm going to do blockchain. Go for it. You have stage access and mic access.
And an echo.
How's it going? Oh, there's an echo?
It'll be fun.
Yes, there is. If you can put on a headset if you have one, please. Or a headphone, whatever you have.
All right, fixed it.
Oh.
No more echo, right?
Don't
I
mind
hear a
that.
barking dog.
That's my security.
Oh, is that
system.
your dog? Oh.
Yeah. Shut up,
Your
security
ADT.
system.
Your ADT. Turn off.
Deactivate.
That's too funny.
I have one
want
too,
to
don't
say
worry.
thank you for coming. This has been great. Love watching. Also wanted to hear a little bit more about aggregated signatures that you're bringing up in regards to the added layers.
Yes. This is something that, it's hard to get a timeline on any of this stuff, right? But hopefully next year, the software has already generally been written.
That seems like a very weak next year. You're like,
yeah. So if you've been keeping track of the Schnorr, Taproot, Mass type of stuff, it seems to me like it's basically written at the protocol level, but what we're kind of stuck on right now is who is going to shepherd forward the activation, which is the really fun part. Not that I necessarily foresee any controversy around it, but I guess we haven't really activated anything at the protocol layer in a while now, and some people may be a bit wary of trying to do that. But getting back to your actual question, the signature aggregation, if you are familiar with the technical construction of a Bitcoin transaction, there is no such thing as a Bitcoin. There's only inputs and outputs, and the quote-unquote Bitcoin are just the unspent transaction outputs. But whenever you're spending Bitcoin, you're having to collect these UTXOs, these unspent transaction outputs, and they become inputs that you sign to prove that you actually owned those UTXOs, that you're allowed to spend that value. Now, these signatures are one of the biggest pieces of data that takes up space on the blockchain. And like we were saying earlier, we're looking for ways to make our use of the block space as efficient as possible. So what if, instead of having to have a ton of signatures with a ton of inputs to a potentially large or complex transaction, we could instead aggregate the signatures and compress them down into essentially one signature. This is something that is very interesting, for me, for Casa, because we provide a multi-signature service, which is one of the best ways to greatly increase the security of your coins. The trade-off is that the transactions that people make with Casa or with other multi-signature providers they're a lot larger from a data standpoint. So you end up paying more in fees. You end up using more block space. That's just one of the trade-offs you have to make for this higher security. You really end up having to pay for it at the blockchain level. So being able to reduce that amount of data that gets used is great from a data standpoint. It's also great potentially from a privacy standpoint if we can start to improve the ways that we're doing coin mixing, for example, and coin joining, which is essentially like a form of having this multi-party collaboration to bring your funds together and essentially obscure the origination and destination of the funds. Those coin join operations also end up creating fairly large data size transactions, and the ability to compress those down as well and use less data is also interesting, because if it's cheaper for people to achieve better privacy on the Bitcoin blockchain, then hopefully that will also incentivize more people to use those privacy techniques. So it's kind of a win-win situation, I think.
Did you die?
I'm trying to figure.
Oh wait, he's not there anymore. Oh, there you are.
I'm right here. I'm trying to think the simplest way to summarize that, yeah.
Have you heard this guy
say
talk?
that shorter.
He doesn't talk in summaries. These are complex questions.
I wouldn't know how to describe that to, I guess, the average consumer. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
You don't.
No, I mean, it is just fairly low-level stuff. I mean, I think the TLDR to all of this is that the scarce resource that people are using to collaborate to decide what Bitcoin actually is, this blockchain, is something that we want to make available to as many people as possible, which means that the less of that resource people need in order to actually use the functionality of Bitcoin, the better. And aggregated signatures just means you can get the same functionality out of Bitcoin without using as much of that resource.
That was greatly said. I'm gonna go ahead and where's the emoji button? Yeah, give him some emoji, guys. Let's see some emojis. Anybody else have any other questions?
Who has that? Is that you with the echo? Sorry, guys, that's better. Okay. So it's the last 10-ish minutes or so, and there's 2 more questions. But what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna let you guys attack him in person, and you can ask him questions yourself. So I'm going to open up the floor. I'm going to mute you guys. You guys can mingle. Feel free to walk around, check out the gallery. Jameson, it was an honor having you on stage today. This was an amazing talk. I feel like I've learned so much just from our brief conversation. I'll probably be following you around like a little puppy as you talk to people through the crowd, listening to what you have to say, because it is very informative. And these are the types of not only talks that I like to have, but meetups that I like to have. And woohoo, VR, guys, give it up for VR one time for the one time, because without VR, we can't make this happen. Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you guys for coming out to another Crypto Mondays. And you can catch Jameson at the next Renaissance Festival, apparently. So, sorry, guys. Alrighty, we are done streaming.